The Galactic Empire had conquered 1,000 worlds, each one bending beneath the weight of their military might. To the soldiers of the 7th Reconnaissance Division, Earth was just another insignificant rock in the void, a primitive world teeming with untamed wilderness and a species clinging to outdated methods of warfare. Their landing was met with silence. No resistance, no planetary defense systems, just an expanse of thick forest stretching toward the horizon. Towering trees swayed in the wind, their tangled branches forming a canopy that filtered sunlight into thin beams. The air was damp, filled with the scent of soil and unseen creatures lurking beneath the undergrowth. Major Vorkith stepped forward, his armored boots sinking slightly into the earth. He sneered, adjusting his helmet's visor to scan the surroundings. "This planet is a joke," he muttered, his voice laced with disdain. Sergeant Lorksh, standing at his side, gave a sharp laugh. "Pathetic. These humans still rely on lead projectiles. I read they even have designated snipers, soldiers who hide in the dirt and pick off enemies one by one. How quaint." The squad behind them chuckled, their exosuits whirring as their advanced targeting systems ran scans of the environment. They were elite, the pinnacle of the Galactic Empire's military machine. Each soldier carried an energy rifle with an onboard AI capable of calculating ballistic trajectories in a fraction of a second. Their armor could withstand directed plasma fire, and their neural implants linked them in real time to the division's tactical network. Against such supremacy, humans were relics. Still, protocol required reconnaissance before full planetary annexation. A small squad of 8 was deployed to assess the wilderness and confirm the lack of intelligent resistance. It was a formality, nothing more. Lorksh stepped forward, his expression filled with exaggerated caution. "What's there to scout? Mud, trees, and, oh no, a wolf?" He grinned, referencing a local predator he had read about. What an uncivilized hellscape. One of the soldiers, Trooper Giroux, kicked a fallen branch, watching as insects scurried away from beneath the bark. "Disgusting," he murmured. "Imagine living like this, surrounded by filth." Vorkith exhaled sharply, tiring of the conversation. "Enough chatter. Spread out and follow the program path. If we're lucky, we'll find a human cowering in a cave somewhere. Maybe even one of these snipers, if we're really fortunate." The squad moved into formation, their visors feeding constant data into their displays. The jungle pressed in around them, thick with vines and bristling with sounds their suits struggled to filter. Unfamiliar birds called out from unseen perches. The rustling of unseen creatures created ghostly movements in the periphery of their vision. Despite their technological superiority, the forest refused to yield its secrets. Minutes passed in eerie silence, broken only by the occasional crackle of the squad's communicators. Vorkith kept his stride steady, but something about this place gnawed at the edge of his awareness. It was too still, too measured. He dismissed the feeling. "This is a waste of time," Lorksh grumbled. "Let's send a drone up for a wide scan and move out." "No," Vorkith said firmly. "We finished this properly. No shortcuts." A crack echoed through the trees. It was soft, almost imperceptible, a sound so minor that even their helmet sensors failed to flag it as an anomaly. Yet, it was enough. Vorkith turned his head slightly, his instincts sharpening. He saw nothing but trees, the same endless green stretching in all directions. And then Giroux fell. There was no warning. One moment, he was walking at the edge of the squad's formation. The next, a fine mist of red sprayed across the foliage. His armored body crumpled to the ground, a smoking hole punched clean through his visor. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. Then chaos erupted. "Contact!" Someone shouted, but there was no enemy to target. The trees swayed in the wind, their branches whispering like amused specters. The squad scattered, taking cover behind thick roots and fallen logs, their weapons sweeping the terrain. Their AI struggled to pinpoint a threat, offering only the useless confirmation that Giroux was dead. Vorkith pressed himself against the base of a large tree, his mind racing. This wasn't an ambush in the traditional sense. No barrage of plasma fire, no overwhelming numbers. Just one shot. A single, impossibly precise shot. Lorch, report. He barked. Lorch's breathing was heavy in his earpiece. Negative on visuals. No heat signatures. No movement. No drones detected. Another shot rang out. Trooper Vexel, crouched low behind a boulder, jerked violently as his head snapped backward. His body tumbled in an unnatural sprawl, his rifle clattering against the stones. His armor shielding had done nothing. The squad froze, realization dawning. This was no random attacker. No desperate human firing wildly in fear. This was something else. Something methodical. Vorkith's muscles tensed. "Sniper," he growled. A heartbeat of silence passed. Then Lorch's voice, stripped of its earlier mockery. "Impossible. They shouldn't be able to." A third shot. The soldier nearest to Lorch collapsed. A perfectly placed round having pierced through the narrow gap between his helmet and shoulder plate. Panic set in. "We have to move," Vorkith snarled. Zigzag formation. Disrupt his targeting. The squad broke into motion, but the jungle turned against them. Thick roots snagged their feet. Vines draped across their visors. The undergrowth swallowed their movements, muffling their sounds in ways they could not predict. Another soldier fell. Then another. The remaining 3 crashed into a clearing, gasping for breath, their adrenaline surging. The silence that followed was deafening. No more shots. No immediate death. Only the quiet, knowing presence of an unseen hunter. Vorkith's mind whirled. Their armor was impenetrable to energy weapons. Their tactics were refined over centuries of war. And yet, here, against a single human with an outdated rifle, they were being reduced to prey. Lorch's face was pale beneath his helmet. "Orders?" Vorkith forced his jaw to unclench. This was not how it was supposed to happen. They had come expecting weakness, expecting simplicity. Instead, they had found something far worse. He gripped his rifle tighter. "Keep moving," he ordered. "We find the sniper. We kill him." But as they pressed forward into the unknown, one final thought clung to the edges of his mind, chilling in its simplicity. The sniper had let them go. For now. The jungle was alive with whispers. Wind threading through the leaves. Distant birds shrieking warnings unheard by those who did not understand them. The alien soldiers moved in tight formation now, their earlier confidence stripped away, replaced by a silent, seething tension. Vorkith led the remnants of his squad with a measured pace, his rifle raised, his every step calculated. 4 of them remained. 4 out of 8. This was no battlefield, no clash of forces where superior firepower dictated victory. This was something else entirely. A slow, deliberate culling. Lorch scanned the terrain, his armored fingers twitching against the grip of his weapon. His eyes flicked across his visor display, searching for anything, infrared anomalies, subtle shifts in movement, a heat signature out of place, but the jungle was chaos. Temperature fluctuations from the thick canopy played tricks on their sensors. The AI struggled to process the sheer volume of data, returning nothing but useless overlays of shifting foliage. "This is impossible," he muttered, voice edged with disbelief. One human. One primitive rifle. He shouldn't be able to. Another shot rang out. A sharp, clean sound. Uncomplicated. Pure. The soldier behind Vorkith jerked violently, his helmet snapping back. He was dead before he hit the ground. His armored body tumbled into the undergrowth, steam rising from the ruined hole in his skull. No warning. No time to react. Vorkith's mind processed it in fragments. The shot had come from their left, or maybe from higher ground, but the jungle had swallowed the sound almost instantly, bouncing it between the trees, warping its origin. His instinct screamed at him to move. "Cover! Now!" They scattered, diving behind whatever natural barriers they could find. Thick roots, dense shrubs, the twisted carcass of a fallen tree. Lorch landed hard beside Vorkith, panting, his wide eyes betraying the first true hint of fear. "This isn't a firefight," Lorch hissed. "It's slaughter." The realization tasted bitter. This wasn't an ambush in the traditional sense. There was no coordinated attack, no volley of fire exchanged between 2 forces. This was patient, controlled extermination, and the sniper had all the time in the world. Vorkith forced his mind to sharpen. Fear was a contagion. Let it spread, and it would rot the will of even the strongest soldiers. He's moving between shots, he said, more to ground himself than anything else. He knows how to use the terrain. He's hurting us? Lorch's jaw clenched. Toward what? A shadow of movement in the trees. Lorch flinched, raising his rifle. Another shot. A wet sound, sickeningly final. Lorch's head snapped forward, a fist-sized hole appearing just above the nape of his neck. Blood misted into the air as his body sagged forward onto the moss-covered ground. The light in his eyes was gone before he could register what had happened. Vorkith didn't breathe, didn't move. His pulse thundered against the inside of his skull. 3 shots, 3 deaths, all in under a minute. The sniper wasn't just skilled. He was a predator. Vorkith pressed himself lower against the ground, willing himself to disappear. The jungle no longer felt like a backdrop to a mission. It was an enemy unto itself, a living thing that whispered secrets to the hunter hiding within it. His visor's interface was useless now. Tactical overlays meant nothing when the enemy didn't engage in predictable patterns. He switched it off, relying instead on instincts he hadn't needed in years. This human was unlike anything he had faced before. Not a soldier in the traditional sense. Not a mindless warrior charging into battle, relying on numbers and superior firepower. This was something else. A survivor. A killer born from a world that had never known peace. Vorkith had read about human snipers before, but he had never given them much thought. In an age of drones, orbital strikes, and autonomous targeting systems, the idea of a lone marksman with a projectile weapon had seemed almost laughable. Now, with his squad reduced to 2, himself and the last remaining trooper, a trembling soldier named Red Han, he was beginning to understand. There was no mercy here, no warning, only the patient, calculated destruction of an enemy who had already won the battle before the first shot was ever fired. Red Han was breathing too fast. His grip on his weapon was too tight, his body tense like a coiled spring. He was losing control. He's toying with us, Red Han whispered. His voice was thin, reedy. We need to call for extraction. Vorkith grabbed his wrist, forcing him to meet his gaze. No transmissions, he said, voice low. The moment we send a signal, we give away our position. Red Han swallowed hard, nodding, but his fear was radiating off him in waves. It wouldn't be long now. Vorkith could feel the weight of the crosshairs searching for them, settling over one of them like the touch of death itself. He glanced at Red Han. The sniper would kill the weaker of the 2 first. That was how a predator worked. Cull the least capable prey. Red Han exhaled shakily, shifting slightly in his crouch. The shot came faster than thought. A brutal crack, a sharp expulsion of air. Rethan's head snapped to the side, blood splattering against the bark of a nearby tree. He fell without a sound, his body collapsing into the moss, fingers still locked around the useless grip of his rifle. Vorkith stayed perfectly still. He did not move, did not breathe. A long, slow silence followed, a silence that told him everything he needed to know. The sniper was watching him now. Vorkith exhaled slowly, his mind racing. He was the last one left, alone, surrounded by an enemy he could not see, could not predict. The jungle pressed in, thick with unseen eyes. The sniper could end it now, fire one last shot, and be done with it. But the shot didn't come. Vorkith swallowed against the dry tightness in his throat. This wasn't over. The sniper wasn't just killing them. He was sending a message, a lesson written in blood, and Vorkith was the only one left to learn it. The jungle had become a graveyard. The bodies of his squad lay scattered among the roots and ferns, motionless, already sinking into the earth's damp embrace. The air smelled of blood and ozone, of sweat and fear. The silence was absolute, save for the distant, indifferent calls of creatures hidden within the dense foliage. Vorkith knelt beside Rethan's body, his pulse hammering behind his eyes. He forced himself to remain still, knowing the sniper was watching. The human had spared him, if only for a moment. But Vorkith knew better than to mistake mercy for weakness. This was a hunt, and he was still the prey. His fingers flexed against the grip of his rifle, and he took slow, measured breaths. His mind sifted through every battle scenario he had trained for, every contingency for ambush and counter-ambush. None of it mattered. His enemy did not fight like a soldier. He fought like a ghost, a phantom that moved unseen and struck with precision so perfect it bordered on cruelty. Vorkith pressed a hand to the side of his helmet, switching to an internal frequency. His suit's AI remained operational, though its sensor feeds were still useless in this unpredictable terrain. He activated a mapping overlay, marking the last 3 shots as data points. They formed no pattern, no discernible trajectory he could use to pinpoint the sniper's location. Cold understanding settled over him. The human was not staying in one place. He was moving between each shot, adapting, shifting like a predator in perfect sync with the environment. Vorkith exhaled sharply through his nose. The fool's mistake would be assuming the sniper was hunting him. But he wasn't. The sniper had already won. This wasn't a chase. It was an execution, drawn out with a patience that sent ice through Vorkith's veins. He pushed himself to his feet slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. The moment he ran, he was dead. The human was waiting for fear to drive him into a mistake. Instead, he took a step forward, then another. The jungle swallowed him whole, vines shifting in unseen hands, leaves rustling without wind. He moved in silence, his every instinct screaming to retreat, to call for extraction, to do something, anything, to disrupt the growing certainty that he was already a corpse walking on borrowed time. His boots pressed into the damp soil, and he adjusted his rifle's grip. The weight felt wrong now. Useless. Advanced technology had failed them. Energy shielding, target tracking optics, neural-linked combat processors. None of it had mattered. Against this enemy, all of their superiority had amounted to nothing. A bead of sweat slid down the back of his neck. His breathing was steady, but his mind was fraying at the edges. He was alone, the last survivor of a force that had never considered failure possible. A shadow moved at his periphery. Vorkith pivoted sharply, rifle raised. Nothing. Just trees. Just endless green stretching in every direction. He gritted his teeth and kept walking. Another sound, a whisper of motion. He turned again, slower this time. The jungle stared back at him. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself forward, but now every step felt heavier. His boots sank deeper into the earth. The air thickened, pressing in on him from all sides. He was being watched, not just from a distance. Up close. Something was here. Vorkith exhaled through his teeth. He had fought in planetary sieges, led boarding parties into burning warships, watched civilizations crumble under orbital bombardments. He was no stranger to war. But this was not war. This was something far worse. The jungle whispered again. Then came the first sound of a new horror. A voice. Soft. Low. Close. You don't belong here. Vorkith went rigid. The words had come from nowhere and everywhere at once. No accent. No emotion. Just a statement, carved from stone and sharpened with the certainty of a man who had long since stopped fearing death. Vorkith turned his head slightly, his breath leaving him in a controlled exhale. His visor scanned the trees, desperate for any sign of movement. Nothing. No heat signature. No shape. No presence. Yet the voice had been real. The human had revealed himself. But why? Vorkith swallowed, pulse drumming against his throat. The voice came again. You should run? Vorkith's muscles tensed. Run? No. No, that was a death sentence. The sniper had been patient. Yes, but now he was testing him. This was another lesson. Another demonstration of control. Vorkith exhaled slowly, then forced his voice to remain even. You've killed my squad. His own words sounded hollow in his ears. You could have killed me already. A pause. Then, from the darkness, I still can? Vorkith's hands clenched into fists. This was a nightmare. A waking, breathing nightmare. Not because he feared death. No, he had faced that possibility many times. It was the realization that the human had been toying with them from the start. That even now, even after 6 confirmed kills, the sniper was still in complete control. Vorkith was not a soldier anymore. He was not an invader. He was prey. And the hunter had finally decided to speak. The silence stretched between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that the sniper had all the power here. Vorkith had one option left. He inhaled. Then, voice steady, he asked the only question that mattered. Why haven't you killed me yet? The answer came, cold and final. Because I want you to understand. A pause. Go back to your people. Vorkith's breath hitched. Tell them what happened here. The jungle swallowed the words whole. Vorkith remained frozen, mind racing. He could hear nothing now. No movement. No shifting branches. No whisper of breath. He was alone again. But not because the sniper had left. No, because he had never needed to be seen in the first place. Vorkith ran. It was not the controlled retreat of a seasoned warrior, nor the calculated movement of a soldier repositioning for battle. It was raw, primal, driven by something deeper than fear. His boots crashed through the undergrowth, splashing mud, snapping branches, his breath ragged inside his helmet. He had fought on burning planets, seen cities turn to glass, watched the air boil away under the force of orbital bombardments. But nothing had ever made him feel this helpless. The human had let him go, not out of mercy, not as a sign of weakness, as a lesson, a warning. And Vorkith had never understood terror until now. His muscles screamed with exertion as he pushed forward, weaving through the thick jungle, trying to put as much distance as possible between himself and the ghost that stalked him. His mind burned with the memory of that voice, calm, cold, certain. You should run? He had not heard the human leave. No movement, no retreating footsteps. It was as if the jungle itself had swallowed him whole. But he was still there, watching. Vorkith's HUD flickered as his suit's AI struggled to recalibrate. The damp air and erratic motion were throwing off the biofeedback monitors, feeding him useless information, elevated heart rate, rising adrenaline levels, warnings of dehydration. He ignored them all. His only priority was survival. Ahead, the jungle began to thin, the oppressive canopy giving way to glimpses of the sky. He forced himself to slow, his soldiers' discipline clawing its way back through his panic. His squad's drop pod had landed less than a kilometer from here. If he could make it back, activate the distress beacon, he might still have a chance. His breath came in short, sharp bursts as he crouched behind a fallen log, eyes scanning the dense foliage behind him. He saw nothing. No shifting shadows. No glint of a scope. But that meant nothing. The human didn't need to be seen to kill. He forced himself to move again, this time slower, more methodical. His rifle was raised, though he doubted it would do him any good. The sniper had already shown that their weapons, their armor, their superior technology. None of it mattered. Another 50 meters. His fingers tightened around the grip of his rifle. 40. His boots crushed damp leaves, the sound too loud in his ears. 30. His breath hitched as a shape loomed in the distance. A sliver of metal, sleek, familiar. The pod. 20. His pulse roared in his ears as he reached the clearing. The pod stood waiting, its dark surface gleaming under the filtered light. His salvation. 10. Vorkith sprinted the final steps, slamming his hand against the control panel. The hatch hissed, servos whirring as it began to open. Movement. He froze. A shadow shifted in the tree-line. His blood turned to ice. The clearing had been empty a second ago. He was certain of it. Yet now, standing at the jungle's edge, half hidden in the foliage, was a figure. The sniper. No armor. No glowing optics. Just a man in worn, dirt-streaked gear, a rifle slung casually over his shoulder. His stance was relaxed, his posture unconcerned. Vorkith could not see his face. Only the darkness beneath the brim of a weathered hat. The human did not move, did not raise his weapon. He simply stood there, waiting, daring him. Vorkith's breath came in shallow, uneven gasps. His fingers hovered over the pod's emergency beacon. He could call for extraction. He could still escape. But even as the thought formed, he knew the truth. The human could kill him before he ever sent the signal. This was still his game. Vorkith swallowed, his throat dry as ash. His every instinct screamed at him to act, to do something, anything, but he was paralyzed. The sniper tilted his head slightly. A silent question. What will you do now? Vorkith's hand shook. He had faced death before, had accepted it as a possibility in every battle he had fought. But this was different. This wasn't just death. It was defeat. He had lost before the fight had even begun. His grip on the rifle slackened. His shoulders sagged. For the first time in his life, Vorkith understood what it meant to break. The stars blurred into streaks of silver as the drop pod hurtled through space. Vorkith sat rigid, hands clenched in a fist on his knees, his breath steady but shallow. The hum of the ship's life support systems filled the silence, but he barely heard it. His mind was still in the jungle, still back there with him. The human's voice echoed in his thoughts, cold and unwavering. Go back to your people. Tell them what happened here. He had obeyed, not out of strategy, not as part of some greater tactical maneuver. He had obeyed because he had no other choice. The weight of his failure pressed down on him like an ocean trench. He had entered the mission certain of victory, a warrior from an empire that had never known true defeat. But now, he was a lone survivor, the sole remnant of a force that had been erased with methodical precision. His fingers trembled, and he forced them still. He could not return like this. Not broken, not afraid. A soft chime sounded. The pod's interface flickered to life, displaying a transmission request from the fleet. His fleet, his commanding officers. The moment he answered, he would have to speak. Explain. Vorkith inhaled through his nose and pressed the comm link. Commander Vorkith, a voice crackled through the speakers. Report. He hesitated. What could he say? That a single human had done this? That their advanced weapons and armor had meant nothing? That he had been hunted, humbled, by something he had once dismissed as primitive? They would not believe him. He barely believed it himself. Mission failure, he said, his own voice alien to his ears. All others are dead. A pause. He could hear hushed conversation in the background. The voice returned, tighter now. Cause? Vorkith closed his eyes. He could still feel the sniper's gaze on him, even now, light years away. You sent us to conquer a wilderness, he said, voice low. We mocked its dangers. Mocked him. Silence. Then, clarify. Vorkith's eyes opened, the swirling abyss of hyperspace reflecting off the pod's interior. He leaned forward slightly, gripping the armrests, his voice steady now. There's a man down there, he said. One man. Another pause. Then laughter, short and humorless. Are you saying a single human did this? Vorkith exhaled through his nose. No, his grip tightened. I am saying we were never the hunters. We were the hunted, and we never stood a chance. A longer silence. When the voice returned, it was different. Less dismissive. Sharper. Are you compromised, commanders? A reasonable question. He had no proof of what had happened. No recovered bodies. No captured enemy. Just his own words, spoken from a place of terror. But he was not compromised. He was enlightened. I am telling you, he said, leaning closer to the comm, to leave that planet alone. Another voice cut in, deeper, higher rank. That is not your decision. Vorkith's jaw tightened. He had expected this. Commander, the new voice continued. You will return to the fleet for debriefing. Until then, maintain silence on this matter. He wanted to argue, wanted to scream that they didn't understand. But then he thought of the sniper, of that final moment in the clearing. The human had let him leave not out of kindness, but out of strategy. A warning was far more effective than a massacre, because warnings could spread. And fear, true, undiluted fear, could change the course of an empire. Vorkith sat back in his seat, pulse steady, and closed the comm link without another word. The fleet would not listen. Not yet, but soon they would, because if they returned to that planet, they would not return at all.